Welcome to Author Stories, the podcast where we talk to the best writers in the industry and discuss writing and the creative process. Whether you're a writer, a reader, or both, we hope you'll find something here that makes you love books and the writers that create them. You can find archives of all of the great conversations I've had with authors over the years at hankgarner.com. Take some time and browse around there. I'm sure you'll find a new author to love, find inspiration for your own creative life, and find a new story to get lost in. Let's thank some sponsors who make the show possible. Vedic by K.J. Heritage. The dead don't always die. Top company scientist Chen Jelinek has committed suicide. Vedic, a half-alive empath with no memory of who or what he is, will die in 6 hours if he can't find out why, or so the company tells him, an added incentive to get the job done. Our hero soon discovers he is one of the skilled, a genetically enhanced human revered and despised in equal measure, a bloodhound with a terrifying past who'll stop at nothing in his pursuit of the truth. And the skilled always get their guy, don't they? Vedic, number 1, by K.J. Heritage, on sale now. There's a link to it in the show notes. K.J. Heritage's uncanny sense of pacing and story puts him at the forefront of today's speculative fiction writers. Gritty, intense, and compelling, Vedic is something you don't run into often enough in sci-fi, a cerebral thrill ride you don't want to end. Prepare to lose sleep reading Vedic, delicious science fiction. That's what other people are saying about it. Find out for yourself. Vedic, the first book in the series by K.J. Heritage. Jasper T. Scott. His box set Dark Space, the complete series. This is 6 books bundled together, on sale now for 99 cents. 6 complete books, over 600,000 copies sold. More than 2,000 pages of epic space opera for the low price of 99 cents. Also available in Kindle Unlimited if you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber. Humanity is defeated. 10 years ago, the Scythians invaded the galaxy with one goal: to wipe out the human race. Now the survivors are hiding in the last human sector of the galaxy, Dark Space, once a place of exile for criminals, now the last refuge of mankind. The once galaxy-spanning Imperium of Star Systems is left guarding the gate, which is the only way in or out of Dark Space, but not everyone is satisfied with their governance. Freelancer and ex-convict Ethan Ortain is on the run. He owes crime lord Alec Barandi 10,000 souls, and his ship is badly damaged. When Barandi catches up with him, he makes an offer Ethan can't refuse. Ethan must infiltrate and sabotage the Valiant, the Imperial Star Systems fleet carrier which stands guarding the entrance of Dark Space, and then his debt will be cleared. While Ethan is still undecided about what he'll do, he realizes that the Imperium has been lying and putting all of Dark Space at risk. Now Brandi's plan is starting to look like a necessary evil, but before Ethan can act on it, he discovers that the real plan was much more sinister than what he was told, and he will be lucky to escape the Valiant alive. Grab all 6 books for 99 cents right now. Dark Space, the complete series by Jasper T. Scott. The Unwelcome Trilogy by R.D. Brady. Survivor, Mother, Leader, and Humanity's Last Chance. Deep within the remnants of the United States, Lila Richards oversees a camp of 200 survivors. In a world where living is an everyday struggle, and only through banding together can people survive, the arrival of the unwelcome only made her job harder. Riley Quinn and Miles Jones have been raised by Lila for the last 5 years. They're also one of the cursed, the children between the ages of 13 and 18, whom the unwelcome kill on sight. No questions, no pleas, just death. Protecting one another and the people of their camp is ingrained in all of them, but now each of them faces increased danger as the reason why the cursed have been targeted by the unwelcome slowly comes to light, and that truth will shock them to their core. Now time is running out, not just for the cursed who are being hunted down by the unwelcome, not just for Lila and her family who will face the greatest challenge yet, but for all of humanity. The world changed radically 35 years ago, but today humanity's very existence is on the line, and the fight has begun that will ensure its future or its annihilation. Fans of A.G. Riddle, James Rollins, Suzanne Collins, and Brandon Sanderson will love the Unwelcome Trilogy. Pick up your copy of the Unwelcome Trilogy on Amazon today. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today I'm really excited to have Brent Weeks back on the show with me today. Brent's been on the show twice before, and we have talked about his Lightbringer series, one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. And we are here talking today because when you hear this show, Book 5 will be out and available everywhere, and you can get a copy into your hot little hands. We've all been waiting with bated breath. Brent, what's been going on in this last year and a half or so since we talked last?
Oh man, lots and lots of work. I've been calling this the manuscript that won't die. I turned in what is supposed to be the final time I touched the book. The galleys, basically. Yeah. You look at the pages just last week, and that's I'm supposed to never touch it again. At that point, you're just changing commas and stuff, or double checking that everything is totally right. And then yesterday, I got an email. Hey, Brent, could the copy editor just had a couple more questions, and I'm like, no, please keep it away from me. So after we finish talking, I will be looking at it one last time. So it's been a long path to publication, let's just say.
So watching all this unfold on Facebook over the last, year and a half, 2 years, whatever it's been, has been immense fun in that you get to follow along with someone else's pain. And we all love that. But
otherwise we wouldn't read, right?
Exactly. You posted a photo, I don't know, it was a couple weeks ago maybe, of the printed pages, and it was 3 freaking reams of paper.
Yeah.
We knew Book 5 was going to be big because, there's a lot of story threads to wrap up and a lot of story yet to tell. What was your thinking in how, how did you predict Book 5 was going to go, and then how were your hopes and dreams dashed and it became what it became?
Well, I knew that this book was going to be long, but I thought that I knew, I did know really well where most of the things were going to go, but I had this trouble when, and I knew this was coming for a couple of books, in that as I approached this final book, I knew that two of the point of view characters really kind of had enough conflicts to face for me to have it be 2 books. Like, okay, that's finale worthy. What he does over there or what she does will just be, we'll keep it muddy. And so 2 of these characters had definitely 2 books worth of conflict to work through. And then the other point of view characters, though, had 1 book worth of stuff to do. So I had this dilemma. It was like, okay, I can do, without naming names, I can do what I've seen in some other epic fantasy of, like, you just sort of spread out the books and, people are kind of locked in. Just because book, 7 is a little bit slow doesn't mean they're, you're like, I that was slow, but I've got to buy book 8. I always hated that when I was growing up. And, these stupid books, they cost $30. And you're like, when you're a kid, you're like, man, that's expensive. So
yeah. When you're an adult raising kids, that's expensive.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. If you have a reading habit, that's expensive. So that always irked me. So it's like, I am not going to put filler in a book. I want a book to be, I want there only to be in a series what needs to be there. And so I was really committed to making this be, making the finishing it up. I was like, okay, this is going to be the last. And I have a strong belief that art thrives on limitations. So it's like, okay, you're writing a sonnet. It's like you got to do it in 14 lines. You don't get to do 15. It's just not a sonnet then. Like you got to get the work done in your 14 lines, like it or not. And with epic fantasy, one of the great things is also the curse of it. It's we get sort of as many pages as we want, at least as long as readers keep buying the books. So, and that can be its downfall because you have this huge canvas, but you also don't have limitations. So I was like, you know what? I want to get this done in one book. And then as I was writing it, I was like, oh my goodness. I had this fear in the back of my mind that like they're going to make me split it because it was getting so big. So that's kind of the limitation I was working against is one internally for the fans. I wanted to finish this series in this book. I wanted it to just be dynamite all the way through without waste. But it turned into this really, really long story because you like to explore the conflicts fully, and so that was always the like, okay, how can I do this all the way through?
So there are some very practical concerns that when you start talking about publishing, story may be one thing, but you have to be able to physically print it, bind it, and all of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And you literally run up against physical limitations in the printing. Did that ever come up in conversations with the publisher? Like, hey, Brent, we're going to have to start making some decisions.
Yes, it did. And so I'd sort of brought this up really early, like, okay, I can cut the glossary and like there's back matter, there's appendices, and there's kind of all the extra world building stuff that you have at the end of a fantasy novel. There's a glossary, there's all that stuff. I'm like, I could actually cut that because it's fairly expansive at this point, and it would save us, maybe 50 pages, which is not actually that many compared to how many pages we've got. But they're like, no, we think it's fine. And I told them, okay, here's the word count. This is what I'm looking at. And looks like the word count's growing a little bit. So I kind of let them know all the way through. And it's a little mysterious to me what exactly happened because, of course, they don't always tell you everything that happens in the background. But I don't think I'll get in trouble for sharing this. Surely. Anyway, my editor won't listen to this, so it's fine. So we got all the way to what's called the first pass, the galleys, which I was just telling you I sent off today. So they sent it to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, they've done it. They didn't compress the heck out of it. Like, and the book, the spoiler, this is not what we ended up with, but the book was going to be 1,250 pages. And like, that's a massive brick, and you literally do have, like, that's as much as you can do. Like, I think at some point you can start doing really, really expensive binding options. Like if you're making, like Subterranean Press does these beautiful versions of books, and they do like the stitched binding rather than glue. Well, but those are super expensive, and a publisher can't do those at a $30 price point, right? like they just they would probably lose money on every copy. So you can do more than 1,200, but at 1,200, you're talking about people carry 1,250. People carry that around. You're going to start losing pages and stuff. I mean, if people beat it up at all. So you kind of have structural integrity issues. But I'm looking at this and I'm like, man, this is amazing, And I hope I never write. I mean, for my own sake, I hope I never write another 1,000-page book. And not simply because it takes so long, but because the mental effort of holding basically a trilogy in your head all at the same time in one book, where you can shift every single variable you want before you publish it, is it is so mentally taxing. I can't even explain. So anyway, they sent this thing to me, and I was like, wow, they actually did it like this, and then like this is kind of cool. I'm kind of excited to have a book that's just so massive, like great. And then like 3 days later, they're like, yeah, so we've been having some talks. and, and they're like, we're worried that thing is going to fall apart, and it's going to drop on people's faces and break noses and stuff. Anybody reading in bed is going to get hurt, and so they're like, so we gotta do some different things. So they have done some different things, and it sort of breaks my heart because I'm now shy of 1,000 pages, and I was like, oh, how many times in your life are you going to get to write 1,000-page book? But so they did what every kid who goes to college does, and they mess with the margins and the sort of the spacing and all that, so that they could have a book that's not 1,250 pages long. So it is still north of 900 or 950 pages, but it's shy of 1,000, which is a little sad. And they had to do some juggling to try to keep it still be readable and be and look nice. But it's like, you know what, when you write a book that's almost 400,000 words long, it's like it's kind of your own fault that some compromises have to be made.
Right.
so I hope readers will forgive me for the for the font size or whatever, and be like, hey, sweet, we got 400,000 words rather than 200,000 words twice.
Right.
Which is still a large novel, right?
Exactly. Well, the good news is the Kindle edition and the audiobook edition weigh the same no matter how many pages there are.
Right. And it's for most people it's one Audible credit regardless, which is
exactly. Would definitely be your money's worth, your credit's worth for that month.
Right. And we've got Simon Vance is finishing out the series. And he's a Hall of Famer. He's one of the guys who has recorded. He might be the guy. He was telling me he's recorded under a couple different names, because it used to be when you switched around, this company or that owned that likeness or whatever. But he might be the man who has done more audiobooks than anyone, literally.
And he does such an amazing job. I have all 4 existing audiobooks, and I have a credit just waiting for number 5. And I remember early on someone else did the Black Prism, and then they got Simon and swapped it out. I'm glad they did, but that was a little weird in the beginning.
I think I can tell this story now without getting in too much trouble. Again, you're just trying to make me get in trouble here, but that's okay. Originally, the first audiobook of Black Prism came out at a really weird time in publishing. Like there was the recession, so everybody was trying to save money, and audiobooks hadn't taken off yet. So for a little while, everybody was trying to save money by going with cheaper narrators, and so they went with a like everybody, it was like, well, do you cut jobs at your publishing company, or do you go with less expensive options? And it was, it was that dire for everybody. A ton of publishing companies were just cutting jobs left and right. So they went with a cheaper option, which was, I think, basically like this kid fresh out of college, and he gave it his all. I can't complain. He did his best work, and he tried his hardest, and it was just like he didn't have a lot of experience doing audiobooks, and it showed.
Stepping into an epic fantasy that's deep water for a new narrator.
Right, and lots of different characters, and there's just a lot to keep track of, and And so readers immediately were like complaining to me, and I sort of, asked quietly, but many times over the course of a few years. First I said, can we bring in somebody great, please? And contractually, I have no say over that. That's not a choice I get to make. It's not like, please ask the author before you make this decision. It's just not in there at all. It's like, it's up to them. So they were wonderful, and they said, you know what, that's sure, we'll see who we can get. So they Simon told me he was kind of brought into this under false pretenses. He he wasn't told that it would be the second book in a series, which he doesn't like to do because people always complain when the narrator changes, even if the new narrator is better, because they've gotten used to the old narrator, right? So you get complaints. So which nobody likes to see complaints about their work. And he was also told it would be like a 12-hour book. And instead it was, over 24 hours. So, he's a super busy guy, and he gets this book. He's already said yes to it, lands on his desk, and he's like, "You're kidding me." So, he's got other work he's got to do, but he gets it done. And he called me up, and we got to talk about it and stuff. And so, apparently I wasn't such a jerk that he didn't want to work with me. So he did it, and then I sort of quietly asked over the years, I think we could, wouldn't it be nice if we could just go back and make all those books fit together? And eventually, they did it, and they did it for me, which they were under no obligation to do. I mean, I tried to make the case that they would make their money back. Please, you'll make your money back if these all fit. Then everybody will hopefully there'll be more sales, which I have no idea if that's true, but that's what I told them. So I don't know whether they just did the math and they thought I was right, or if they just wanted to keep the author happy because he tries not to complain about too many things. But they did it, and so it's sort of it took us a long time, but we got to the point where they re-recorded that first one, and now they're all with Simon. So that's brilliant.
Well, what's interesting is, like you said, they're under no contractual obligation to let you have any say-so into that. But they did, and they listened to you. And I think they obviously made a great decision. And but we're in an interesting time because while they're under no obligation to give you those options, we live in a time now where with social media and things like that, you have a relationship with your readers. And you put information out there, you get feedback from people. You kept us informed all through the writing of book 5 and through the editing. And, whereas some authors who maybe are silent and they just leave people to their, leave room for rumors to come up and all that because there's no communication. Well, we live in a time now where there's an actual interaction between that. Do you feel like publishers are realizing that, and are they making concessions based on the new communication that we have now between reader and writer?
I think they are aware of. I think they certainly they're aware of feedback. And if they put out a cover. And, they're looking to see, are fans complaining? Oh, this girl is very light skinned, and in the book she's dark skinned. Like, oh, shoot, like they pay attention to that sort of stuff, and they should, to a large extent. It's like it matters what the hardcore fans are saying. I mean, like especially with bigger books, bigger than mine, people are going to complain regardless. So there's a certain amount of stuff that they just consider static. And it's just like, there's going to be 2% of people who just hate it, no matter what you do. So I think they get pretty used to filtering that, and authors are probably less used to filtering that because, because authors are at base, most of us are kind of artistic personality types, and we're not first business people. I mean, there are people who go into writing novels because they're smart business people and they think this is a great way to make a passive income or something. But most of us come into it because we love novels, and then we have to figure out the business side. And I think some authors are just better at, they have different skill sets. And it's like these days, I've certainly juggled how am I going to communicate with fans, and if I have to tell fans disappointing news, like. What if they rip me? Like what if I'm like, oh, you guys, I mean, telling fans like I need another year to get this thing done was really hard for me. I mean, I probably wrote posts for that 5 or 6 times. like how do I tell guys this? Because I felt like I was totally disappointing fans, and like I'd told them I was going to do something, and now I wasn't going to do it. And like I wasn't living up to my word, and it was really hard. So when other authors don't handle it well, I have a lot of compassion for them, while holding at the same time. It's like, man, if you tell fans something, even if you tell them, guys, I'm really struggling and I am working hard on this, it's not going well. I think even telling them that, a lot of fans are going to be like, well, hey. Okay, thanks. It's nice to know you're thinking about it. And you're not just, sitting back in the Bahamas cashing checks. Which I think most writers, they want to finish their books. So it's like, yeah. But it's definitely a new landscape.
Yeah. Well, a lot of us know writer Brent, who we see on Facebook and around the internet, and we love your books. But there's also real life Brent, who has a life of his own and a family and all of that kind of stuff. And while we definitely want the support of our readers, and we want them, we definitely want them to show up and buy the book when it's out, but we want them to still think fondly of us along the way.
Sure.
But we also have to balance out real life and family and the things that keep us going day to day. How important is a real life support system when you're going through a difficult time in writing and when the news does look like guys, it's going to be another year or so?
Yep.
How do you juggle real life in that situation?
I'm with great difficulty. I mean, there's sort of the micro and the macro questions with this. It's like, how much is writing your life, and how much do you live in online virtual communities versus in your own community? And there's things to like, look, my daughters are beautiful. They're super cute. I could totally share that part of my life with readers, and I get tons of likes, and people would understand more about why I want to spend time with my kids. And I'm like, you know what? My kids are super important to me, but I want to protect them from that. When they're 18 or when they're 15 and somebody Googles their name, I don't want daddy to be the first thing that pops up, right? And so it's like you set those boundaries, and I don't know. I mean, I think all of my efforts are basically probably futile, but I do them anyway. I'm making an effort to protect my kids, and other people put those lines in a different place and they post their kids, and that's fine. Like, I'm not judging anybody for doing that. I'm just like, we have to decide for ourselves of like, how do I feel about everything being public? And like, I don't love the idea of celebrity. Like, I want to do great work, but when I go and I get like on a book tour or something, and you sort of get treated like you're a big deal for a few days, like, I think of that as like a vacation from reality. And then I come back home and it's like I'm in front of the keyboard, and my neighbors, think I'm a nice guy who they don't see very much outside.
There's Pasty Brent again.
Yeah, there's Brent, that rocking that Irish tan. So it's like, I think that having a real life support system is is really important. It's good to. I mean, I took Facebook off my phone. I took Twitter off my phone, because that stuff. It's like what people are saying about you is like who don't know you and who think of you as a celebrity or whatever. And so they'll say snarky stuff. It's like that's not helpful. You don't need that in your life, really. It's not that important for you to follow that minute by minute, and it's very easy to get the endorphin hit by look, somebody thought my joke was funny, great. you know so I like to I like to try, and I'm trying to do better with expanding the social network in real life, because it's easy. I think most successful authors have a strong streak of workaholic in them. I mean, all the writers I know work their butts off. so it's trying to figure out healthy is a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. So the new book is coming in, The Burning White's coming in at about 400,000 words. What's the overall series word count? Have you tallied it up?
I think it's got to be probably 1.6 or 1.7 million words, somewhere in there. Yeah.
We're probably not going to get an omnibus edition.
Yeah. I mean, it'll come on microfiche, and you'll get a magnifying glass with it.
Oh, that's amazing. When you began this series, and let's kind of recap for folks who may not have read the whole series. The Lightbringer series is a story about family. It's a story about political intrigue, and it has a really, really cool magic system. When you first envisioned this series, could you see the ending where we are now from where you were then?
Not all of it, but I had some significant pieces of the ending for several of the main characters. And obviously some characters who became main characters I didn't even have in mind at the very beginning. So yeah, I had a lot of the themes I wanted to deal with. I had some of the institutions I wanted to deal with. I had where I wanted the characters to end up. Like, this kid starts out here, and then he ends up over here, and this woman starts here and ends up over here, and this character does this, and this character keeps this secret. How many books can I keep that secret? I'm gonna bring this twist out at the time that it works best. So I seeded in a lot of details about the journey. But I'm not a hardcore outliner. I'm sort of a hybrid. The way I always put it is I pick out mountain peaks in the distance and I go, let's get there. Let's get to the top of that. And then I go, as I'm going, if I find a more interesting way to get there, I say, well, let's take the scenic byway to get there. But if there's a scenic byway that doesn't get us there, I say, we're not going that way. So that gives me a focus at the same time as it gives me creative freedom.
Well, and it gives you the opportunity for high points in plot as you discover things that you go along the way and new side missions before we get to that next mountaintop.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you're not a hardcore outliner, and we now are 1.6 million words into the story, how do you track it? Like, what are some of the, most novelists turn in a book about 100,000 words, and some people have to meticulously outline that. Some people can hold it all in their head, but there's always some reading back over and, okay, what did I do with this character here? Well, when you start talking about a story this size, like, what are some physical tools that you use to just track the whole thing?
Well, I mean, clearly I hold a lot of it in my head, but then there's things where I will be like, Probably the most frustrating thing is that I'm a writer who will make big changes. I try to hold that as one of my strengths of like I will make big changes if they have to happen, and I'll make them in any place in the edits when that becomes necessary. It's like okay, that's going to change, that's going to stink, but I'm going to make those changes. So I have done things where like I will make an edit very late in the process of a book. So I've been working on the book for 2 years. It's been in my head one way, and then in the last month before I turn it in, like I'll change something. My editor says, this doesn't really go anywhere, and yeah, you're right. That doesn't really serve this book very well. So I'll cut a few paragraphs or whatever, and then I'll hand in the book and I'll go along and I won't think of it for another 4 years, and then in this book I wrote a scene that really beautifully tied in this character who'd showed up, was very mysterious, had a few lines of dialogue, tie that back in beautifully, from 8 years ago or something, and then I was like, hold on a second, and I asked my assistant to look that up. So that's one of the things I do. I say, can you find the places where I mentioned this guy? Because I think I did this thing. And then she'll go and she'll find those for me. So there's just some mechanical things that I could do myself, but my assistant does them for me to save me some time while I'm working on, other things in edits. And so she's like, yeah, that's not in the books anymore. And I was like, oh no, you're right. Now I remember. I cut that in the last couple weeks of the book. So I'll have these details in my head that, they were one way for a really long time. And then I changed them late. And then it's like trying to remember. It's worse than just trying to remember all of the words that are published. It's like you're trying to forget the words that you didn't publish. So the human brain is not a computer. It's not like you just skipped over that file and now the previous file is gone and isn't that happy. It's like, no, you had it a certain way and you thought of it that way and kind of ingrained that memory 40 times, and then it's the new way you thought of it 2 times and you're like, hold on, what was the thing? So sometimes people will ask me like plot questions from things from books years ago, and I'm like, now, did I do it that way or did I end up going with the other one?
Yeah, Jim Butcher told me one time, he said that if you ask a question, he said, well, that all depends on which version of the book, and it's the same kind of thing, is which edit, because they're all just Dresden Files to me.
Right.
And then we have to go back and reference what we actually published. And
right.
that's something that you're right. The writer brain is not a computer, and all of that story is melded into this one big memory.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you have to have an assistant or some sort of wiki or something to be able to reference.
Yeah, so I certainly use my assistant. She has a program that she uses called Eon Timeline, and so she's sort of compiled things. And my previous assistant had used that as well. So sort of like we update that and you check things and there's stuff that's really irritating about epic fantasy, and it's probably a reason, especially with organic writers. Or pantsers, however you want to call it, gardeners, that happens in epic fantasy, which is like in book 1, you're making everything up for the first time, and you're going along and you're just like, yeah, 20 years ago, this thing happened. And then, well, why was it 20 years ago? You don't know. You're just sort of like, it's like, well, might as well be 20 years ago. It was a while ago. The only relevant thing for this character is that that's something my dad did, or, whatever. And then 200 pages later, you say, yeah, and this was 35 years ago. And then 4 years later, you make up some other detail about some other family, and then pretty soon somebody brings it to your attention, or you go, wait, now those people were married, and what was the age of? Oh, that girl was 2 when she got married. And you're like, oh no. And you're like, they didn't have any kids, did they? And it's like, No, they didn't have any kids, or at least that could have been much later. Okay, thank you. You're but like that's a microcosm of what will happen to you. Is you make up these details. You have lots and lots of characters, so you have to make up a lot of details. And when you're making up details, when you're in creative mode, it's like you're not going back and cross-referencing that. Like if you stop every time you make up a new detail about a side character and look for everything that you've done thus far, you're just not going to make any forward progress at all. So eventually, as you go in, you're like, I have to make sure that this works with things I said in book 1, in book 3, later in book 3, in book 5, and then at the end of book 6, and you have to do that over and over and over, and you make mistakes, and you're like, that's a big mistake. How do I get around that? And it becomes this just this vast tangle if you're not very careful. So that's why big long fantasy tends to slow down toward the end, because there's just more stuff that can conflict with other things that you've said before, and it's like how many readers get really upset about that? Probably very few, but it feels like bad craftsmanship when you say, maybe I should just ignore that and nobody will notice. Yeah, you don't want to do that. So
it's kind of the blessing and the curse of world building, and the blessing is that it's absolutely what you say it is. There's nothing to compare it to say that it's not. And then books 2, 3, 4, and 5 are constrained by this thing that you created. Mm-hmm. Have you learned anything through writing this series and your previous series that helps you to think of things that may come up in the future without getting out of creative mode and getting too analytical while you're just making stuff up?
Sure. Oh yeah. I think I've learned about just certain scope things, like even from reading other writers, it's like you can start to make up too much stuff where it's like this character, okay, you know the backstory, but does the reader remember the backstory from 6 years ago when you mentioned this character who didn't seem to be that important? Or are you always having to backfill way too much or demand too much of readers? And so it's like, you know what? Trim that down a little bit. Like what you want to give your readers is a feeling of a world that is as vast as our own with lots of players. But at a certain point, you can outrun both an average or even a good reader's memory, and you can also outrun your own skills. I remember reading. I won't name the writer because it's criticism, but I remember the writer brought in another character, and I realized very quickly, like, this character is like every other character with this last name in their book. Like now this character has not only become less interesting as a character, but they've devolved everybody with that last name of like, oh, that's a cardboard cutout for that family. And so now every in that family, I just go like, oh, okay, this was your shortcut for a character who has these characteristics, and you're just hanging your hat on that. This is not a fully formed person. This is, a guy who's greedy and loyal to his own family, and what have you, a schemer, and you go like, okay, that's what that means, and he's faceless. Okay, and you go, you just outran your skills there. So try not to outrun your skills. And obviously as writers, we're always trying to, bump up against the edge of our skills. But like if you're bad at dialect, you're not Mark Twain. You can't do 20 different Deep South dialects and differentiate from all of them. Well, don't write a bunch of dialects. Just like understand that about yourself. Like don't write a book set in England and have 30 different kinds of English and Scottish and Irish accents and Welsh accents all at the same time, because you won't do it well and you'll spend too much time on it and it just won't matter anyway. So you got to pick out what you're good at, and while you're always working on spreading, building up your other skills. But so there's certain things about limiting the scope of your world, about the biggest burden of epic fantasy is exposition. You're always having to explain stuff. So thinking about exactly how complicated do you want this to be? I ended up trimming, like I have this complicated magic system based on colors and spectrum of light, and so there's a lot of systems for me to mess with, both in real science, which is objective, like you're like, okay, the visible light range is between 460 nanometers and what have you. So there's things that are absolutely objectively true, and then there's things that are subjective. It's like, well, if you're colorblind, you can't tell the difference between this and this, right? And so these systems layer, and I was like, I got to a point where like there was still other cool stuff that I'd found out about the world, and like different cultures have different numbers of color words, and then the number of color words seems to impact your ability to differentiate between colors. And so there's like all this other cool stuff. And I was like, you know what, Brent? Stop it. It's complicated enough.
Right.
Like you're doing color theory and you're doing all this science, and the world is set in kind of 1600. So they don't have a lot of the terminology to communicate this stuff, and if you bring in too much stuff that they wouldn't even understand in the first place, or you sort of cheat and say they'd understand it better than we would at that point because they care about it so much, it's so important to the world. But still, stuff can get like okay, we don't need a 10-page science lecture. We need to tell a story. So I cut stuff that was like, oh, that would be interesting to explore, and it's like, nah, too much. Let it go.
As a fantasy writer, you obviously were a big fantasy fan to begin with, and that's what motivates you to tell your own types of fantasy stories. When you're in the midst of writing, can you read other fantasy writers, or do you have to separate yourself?
Yeah, it stinks. I find myself very easily influenced by writers that I'm reading, and especially great writers or writers who are really great at certain things. It's like I read some Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams, and it was like, oh my gosh, like that humor was
now I'm wisecracking.
Yeah, right. Like it's just like that humor slips right into like that style of humor is like I could probably go back, and if I read my book, I can tell you when I read those guys. And it's like, oh, I mean, I hope it's funny, I hope it works. But it's like, oh man, there's certain stuff I just like, I don't want to read while I'm reading, while I'm writing. And unfortunately I'm writing, most of the time. So it's severely curtailed my own fiction reading. But what I have done is I read tons and tons of history. And then I'll take breaks and I'll read a thriller or something. I'll read outside the genre, because then that's one, it's more relaxing, and two, people in other genres do other things really well. Like if you're going to write a murder mystery, or you're going to write a thriller, it's like your plot has to be tight. And epic fantasy, your plot doesn't have to be tight. Like your characters have to be pretty good. Your world building's got to be great. There's certain other things like you can be good at a lot of different things, but tightness of plot is not in the top, 4 things anyway in epic fantasy or in fantasy period. So it's nice to go outside the genre. Plus, whenever I'm reading fantasy, like I'm working. It's like, that was nicely done, and I like how you introduced the magic system there, and like, okay, you're giving us the rules, but you're not info dumping, and I like how you set that up, and that was a good introduction to that character, and there's just a lot of like, that's not really downtime, and I've had so little downtime, it's not really how I want to spend my the downtime I do have. So So yeah, it's a bummer though. I miss it.
Well, I think it's really important to read outside your genre, and it's one reason that we have such a varied guest kind of roster on this show. Is I like to hear from all sorts of different people. There are things that a lot of fantasy writers could really learn from thriller writers, and could really stand to tighten up their plots. And there are a lot of thriller writers who could really stand to spend some more time on their world building and their characters. I think it's really important to learn from each other and to pull in some of those different elements. I think that's what keeps the genre fresh when we expand out a little bit.
Right. Well, so somebody said something, and it was probably like Murakami. What? Oh shoot! I think a Japanese writer said this. Whose name I'll immediately Google and after we're done. He said, if you're reading all the same books as everybody else, you're gonna write very similar stuff to them. And so I kind of like reading different books from everybody else. It's like okay, I'm gonna bring my own thing to the genre. I'm gonna bring my own mix of influences in, and hopefully then not be making up exactly the same kind of things that they are.
Exactly. So Brent, where does this time find you? You've closed, the final chapter on the Lightbringer series. You've got a little time to catch your breath and to think new things. Where's your mind headed next? After I answer these questions on what I call maybe the fourth pass, and you're supposed to, for the galleys. Once I get those done, then it will really be done. It's sort of an odd in between time for me because I'll sort of start working on something, and then there'll be some sort of little marketing thing. And it's like, oh, hey, can you get this to us by tomorrow? And it's like, I really wanted to work on this new book, thanks, So you do the marketing thing, and then it's like, hey, can you do this other thing? And, oh, no, okay, fine. I mean, what are you going to say no? It's like, we're trying to sell your books, Brent. Please help us. Oh, okay, fine. I'll help you. But I've been this is probably a common thing among writers. When the current book gets hard, the next book always looks really easy and fun. So I've been thinking about the next book for quite some time, which once you get there, it never turns out to be easy and fun, or at least not all easy and fun. So I've had the next book in mind for quite some time. Actually, when I first started Lightbringer, I was on the fence between writing more stuff set in the Night Angel world or doing something totally different and writing this Lightbringer trilogy. And I thought, hey, I'm a published writer now, so I'm like a pro. So I'll bang out this Lightbringer trilogy in 3 years. And then then I'll get back to doing some Night Angel world stuff, and that'll be great. Obviously, the story grew in the telling, as Tolkien said. But I've been thinking about some stuff, some stories set in the Night Angel world for a really long time, and that's what will be next for me. I was considering, no, I'm still considering whether I do some novellas. In between, really getting down to working on that hardcore, but I'm not sure about that yet. And those would be things that just take me a few months and hopefully fill in the gaps in time here. But yeah, it's going to be something set in the Night Angel world. I'm gonna mix it up a little bit and try to bring myself some new artistic challenges. I've written a tiny bit of it, and then immediately got interrupted by, other things. But I'm really eager to do it. I'm still a little nervous that the muse is going to take me a new direction. So I haven't been telling fans exactly what I'm planning to tell. But it will be set in the Night Angel world. Nice. I'm looking forward to it. Brent, I'm a huge fan. I love what you're doing. and excited to read book 5, and then excited to see what comes next. One last question before we go. What happened to the beard?
Oh, my daughter. So my daughter, who was maybe, what was she? Hardly 2 at the time. And she was the one who would pull on my beard, and people who don't have beards, I don't think they understand how much that hurts.
Oh yeah,
you have a lot of nerve.
That skin is
in your
sensitive.
face, and when somebody pulls on the hair of your beard, it really hurts. And so she was the one who tended to pull on my beard really hard. But she took my hands, she took my face in her hands, and she said, "Daddy, I think you'd look good with a short beard." Or I like you better with a short beard, I think is what she said. So I was like, okay, you know what? It's been fun to do the long beard thing. I'm a redhead, so my beard went gray really early, which I think is pretty common in red-haired men. So I was like, okay, it'll come back someday when I'm willing to look like a really old guy. We cut it off, and then last week she was like, "Daddy, I think you'd look good with a beard." Hey,
make up your mind.
It'll take me 2 years to grow that out, right? So, and my wife just shook her head. She's like, She's like, "I let you do it last time." She didn't say anything to me while I grew it out last time. I think she was like, "Okay, let him have his thing." But this time she was like, no, I don't really like you with the beard right now. So yeah, I was like, you know what? Fine. I can be epic fantasy writer with a goatee like everybody else, but that's all right. It doesn't have to be part of my persona or whatever.
Well, beard or not, we're excited about book 5 of the Lightbringer series, Burning White. When you're hearing this interview, it'll be available everywhere in hardback, Kindle edition, audiobook with Simon Vance. Looking forward to it, Brent. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day and out of your schedule to do this, and I apologize for being one of those distractions.
No, not at all. Not at all. Thanks for having me, and I just want to say, wanted to say a thank you to the fans who've been very patient with me. I think they're going to see that the extra year that I took to write this book was well worth it. I am super excited to share this with you all. I'm really proud with how it turned out. So thank you very much.
Brent, where can people find you online?
They can find me. I'm on Facebook. Facebook.com/Brent.Weeks. They can BrentWeeks.com. I'm on Twitter, Brent Weeks, all one word. And hopefully those are the only places that can find me online. So
we'll put links to all of it in the show notes. Brent, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thanks so much for having me on here. It's been a joy.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
On the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, Joey locked the doors of the Washington Irving Chapel and checked the windows from the outside, making sure that the cemetery offices were dark. Satisfied, he donned a knit cap and trudged uphill to the employee parking lot. He'd forgotten how desolate the grounds became at night. A fog had gathered, blurring the moon and stars. His rusty Volkswagen Beetle, christened Ladybug by Jason, sat in shadow alongside his dad's white van, which bore an image of the horseman and the cemetery's web address. Joey swept a palmful of condensation from Ladybug's windshield and fumbled for his keys. He heard a laugh, high and young. He froze. "Hello?" He shook off gooseflesh and found his key. He started the engine and backed out, headlights off, praying not to knock over a headstone again. A child stood on the hillside amongst the graves. "You okay, kid? Cemetery's closed." He turned on his headlights. The child vanished. Joey idled in the drive, frowning. What had just happened? He turned off the headlights and waited for his eyes to adjust. The silhouette reappeared. The child stood in the road now, blocking his way. He and the ghost stared at each other. He bit his tongue and squinted over the steering wheel. He couldn't resolve the ghost's features, only a tiny body in ruffles? Yes, a dress. A little girl with shoulder-length hair. The figure crouched, threw its arms over its head and skipped away. A giggle followed after. The ghost skipped up the hill, turned around, and beckoned through the fog. Please come. Joey shook his head. No way. Ain't gonna happen. But he felt compelled to follow. What could a little girl do to him after all? He would keep a safe distance. The gravel sounded like soft rain beneath his tires. It drew him helplessly, past weeping cypresses and mausoleums blue with moonlight. He followed the giggle, the skipping ribbons, the little body made of shadow and quicksilver. The north end of the cemetery grounds rose to a steep wooded slope. The ghost had led him to Section 77, the northernmost boundary of the cemetery, but he'd lost her. He killed the engine, summoned his courage, and climbed out. The night air brought him fully awake. "Where are you?" he whispered, scanning the graves. A row of diseased hemlock trees stood at the fence line. Joey knew them well. They were dying, infested by some parasite called, he fished for the name, woolly adelgig. His crew had cut them back many times, lopping off limbs and heads, trying to save them. The hemlocks had grown back twisted and tormented. They stood as a row of grotesque sentinels guarding the threshold of the forest. The ghost climbed the slope, spun at the fence, and sat hugging her knees. The black mass of the Rockefeller State Park Preserve loomed behind her. "What do you want?" Joey whispered. "Play." He stepped forward, hands shaking. He just wanted to see her face, the face of a real ghost. To see the curve of her cheek, the sparkle that might have been her left eye. "Come and play, Joey." He froze. The sound of his name terrified him. She pointed over his shoulder. "Play with us." He turned and realized his mistake. He'd driven with his eyes on the girl, trying not to lose her, never looking behind. They had been followed.